Hey, everybody. This is Keith Gleason coming at you with another episode of Indie Comics Relay. And joining me tonight is my lovely co host, Johnny C. How's it going, Johnny?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Another beautiful Wednesday.
I
Uh,
know.
I don't know about anybody else, but this week's been brutal. So
Oh
I
my
just
God.
can't
Me
wait
too,
for it to
dude.
be over.
Me too. Me too. This week has been rough, dude. I think
Uh,
everybody coming back from Thanksgiving is just, yeah.
yeah,
It's been
it's been
nuts.
it's been a tough
And
one.
yeah, and then we're kind of bucking things too with the next few weeks because we're going to be live next Wednesday with Roy Thomas,
Yep.
and then the Wednesday after that, which would be our normal schedule, with I don't know who yet, but we're trying to get like a nice Christmas episode going, right?
Yeah, I've got the word out, and I think we have a few people lined up. But I want to make sure that everybody's confirmed before I start naming names.
Yeah, that's great, and we could have a handful of people do something a little different that week.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines of the Halloween thing we did, but maybe with
Like
a little
maybe
bit
not as
more.
long, but like try to do like one question or something, or
Yeah,
you're
or maybe a little bit more just platform time for people to talk about their stuff, but also put a little Christmas spin on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
But
So,
I'm,
yeah, so
I
we
was just going
gotta,
to say, I'm really excited about tonight's guest because tonight's guest is a friend.
yes,
Whether it's a small convention in Lewiston, Maine, or on the floor of San Diego Comic Con, I've seen this fellow, and he's one of those creators that's I like to call him a considerate creator in the sense that if you see him in circles and if you're friendly with him, he's the type of guy that will come to your booth, will come say hi, will check in with you. He's always just been like a consummate professional, but also just a good dude. So
yeah, I agree. And I haven't known him as long as you have, so I'm looking forward to getting to know his origins and everything tonight. So,
yeah.
without further ado, let's bring on our special guest, Dylan Andrews. Hey, Dylan, what's going on?
Hey Dylan, how's it going?
It's going
Or,
great. How are you?
yeah,
Thank you so
there we
much for
go.
having
That's a
me.
better. Yeah. Thanks for joining us. We've been doing the show for a few months now, and we're kind of getting into our groove finally. But one thing we always start with whenever we have an indie creator on is we love to learn the origins of the creator. So we'd love to know like how you got started on the path to making comics. Like what was the first comic that you read that inspired you, or you know what I mean, or what got you into this field?
Yeah, when I started reading when I was a young, like I think 5 years old. I was at like a convenience store. My father and my uncle and my family. There's a lot of artists in my family and a lot of people that went to art school. So they were always really inspiring and educational as far as art and drawing. So I would draw a lot when I was younger. And then when I was 5, I remember being at a convenience store and getting Wolverine, the Frank Miller miniseries, issue number 4, where he's got like the
Oh wow.
crossbow. I
Yep.
remember that one vividly, that very stark cover. And then I remember on the inside of the comic, Frank Miller has that silhouette of Wolverine, and he like goes to that drug deal and like cuts the briefcases in half. And I just remember looking at that sequence of Frank Miller pages as a kid and just not understanding what I was looking at. I was so young I couldn't comprehend it. It's kind of like when you hear music, a genre of music that you've never heard before. At first, you're like, I don't get it. Like, it doesn't make sense. How does this work? And
Yeah.
I really wanted to try to figure it out. So what I would do is I'd take Sharpie markers, like red Sharpie markers, and every time Wolverine had his claws in, I would draw them out. So I ruined all my comic books that way. But that kind of was the first thing. Like, oh, I get that. Like, you make marks on paper, and then you put all that paper together. And so my family was very supportive, and they're like, yeah, just draw all the time. This is what you're going to do. So I would draw every day, fill up sketchbooks, just fill up notebooks, reams of copy paper and pencils and pens. And also, too, I was a pretty shy kid growing up. So I think a lot of comic book people probably are introverted. So I would often spend
It's
a lot of
true.
time just by myself drawing and reading. It was a great way to kind of be beyond reality and to a fantasy world. But I loved the hero's journey. I loved that idea of being heroic and being brave, and I really connected with all that as a
Yeah.
young kid who was kind of shy and quiet. So that's been how I started. And then like most, creative people, I drew a lot in school, and people kind of recognized that. So I got opportunities to do like Maine College of Art and Haystack Art Immersion Camp. My uncle is a fine artist, so I took classes with him in painting.
Oh, wow.
And then I went to Syracuse, and at that time it was, growing up reading all those '90s Image comics that I loved, and reading Wizard magazine, and I would walk from the elementary school to the comic book store. There's a comic book store within walking distance, and it was like, how they were baseball cards, and then they realized they could make more money with comic books in like '92, so it was just all comic books. So I'd go in there, and that guy would gouge everybody. You'd be like, "Oh, I want this the Death of Superman." He's like, "That's $100." I'm like, "I don't have $100." Like, "All right, 20." I'm like, "Okay, I don't know what things cost." So, I would just blow through because my mom worked at the school, and she was like, "Just take $5 and get as many comics as you can." I'm like, "Okay." And I would also walk to the pharmacy, which was right there, and they had a spinner rack. So I was a little kid, like 8, 9 years old, on the spinner rack, and I remember one time a guy, one of the people working there, was like, "This isn't a library." I was like, "Oh man," I was like a little kid. I was so scared. I like ran out. This mean old man was mean to me because I was reading comics all afternoon while my mom was working. So then I went. So that the big thing about that image explosion was that you saw the faces of the creators in the back of Wizard magazine. And I remember being like, these are real people. Like, this is a person. Like, it's not made by like some superhuman mutant
Somebody
robot.
made like a machine or something, right?
Like, I didn't.
That guy in that Calvin Klein ad draws Youngblood.
Well, that's the thing, is that before, like, people now are so connected with creators, like they can see us, they can interact with us. But back then, you didn't know what Jim Lee looked like, or Stan Lee, or Rob Liefeld. Like, you didn't know. And so
that was like the flipping of the switch at that time too.
It was, and that was kind of the realization. Like, I remember reading interviews with Todd McFarlane and seeing him in a magazine, and I was like, "Oh my God, this guy is as important to this Spider-Man as Spider-Man." And so when they did Image Comics, I was all in. I'm like, "Yes, whatever those people are doing, I love it."
And thank God for them, because like the indie scene, I think is benefiting so much from that movement. Especially as far as like creator rights goes, and like owning your own IPs whenever you create something, and just they blazed a trail for indie creators everywhere.
And one of the big things I don't think that they get enough credit for, they're obviously recognized as being incredibly important to the industry, especially at that time. But they brought on people and exposed me to people that I wouldn't have known, like Alan Moore writing an issue of Spawn. Like Neil Gaiman, I don't know who Neil Gaiman or Alan Moore are, but I said, like, well, they're in Spawn. Like, the idea of having Cerebus in a Spawn, I'm like, I don't know what that is, but okay. And then them bringing in like Sam Keith doing Max, or Dale Keown doing Pitt, and I was like, oh wait, these are other people that I might maybe know the Hulk, or I maybe have seen him do Wolverine, but I didn't know those creators. And so you kind of get into that indie underground that I think they really showed that off well.
They kind of made comics cool. Like, it was always like comics it was like anything else at the time. Like, geek stuff was just not cool. Like, and they kind of brought that rock star kind of mentality to the comics. You know what I mean? Like,
and it's hard to explain to people now, like, what the '90s were like. You sound like you're like, oh yeah, back when I was a kid, like, we walked uphill in the snow both ways, and it's like, that's not.
People had shoulder pads and pouches everywhere.
Yeah, and they're like, it sounds so strange to be like, I didn't know what Todd McFarlane looked like, and they're like, how could you not, like, he's not on doing a Facebook Live? You're like, that wasn't a thing. So yeah, no one knew what any of these creators looked like. So then when they became famous, it was so amazing. But I'm in Southern Maine. There's no comic book creator scene here. There's no conventions. There was no. I mean, I went to a few small ones, but I didn't feel connected. I thought it was like, oh, it's New York, and that's kind of the only place to do it. So after the Image boom, there was the bubble burst, which was crazy to see the comic book, the comic book market change. So when I went to school in Syracuse, I went to Syracuse University for communication design, and I took a lot of illustration classes. But at that time, I was like, I don't think comic books are going to be around. I thought at that time, I'm like, this might not be a thing anymore. So I don't want to focus all my attention on doing illustration. I thought that possibly doing communication design, doing graphic design, that'd be a way to do, or publishing would be a way to learn how to produce content without necessarily having it be pigeonholed into the genre of comic books, because who knows whether those will be around. I thought in 98 to 2000 when I was at school in Syracuse. And so I still love comics. I still went to the comic book store, but it was different. It was definitely more of a niche thing. It was not as pop culture. It wasn't as mass market. And that was before the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. That was before the X-Men movie, or around that time when that X-Men movie came out. And so then seeing it all of a sudden build back up again has been so awesome. I felt so appreciative to be around when I saw the comic book, the rise, the fall, and then the rise again. It's been really, really fun to.
Yeah, it's like a massive ride, roller coaster ride. Like, I feel like we're starting to dip down again into like the dark ages again, especially with like the stuff going on with DC and Marvel. They seem to be laying off a ton of people, and I think anything the indies are going to flourish, though.
Well, that's the thing.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
I was just going to say a lot of the things that are happening, I feel like with DC and Marvel, really, when it boils down to it, is corporate intervention.
And when I graduated from Syracuse University, I was like, I want to get into publishing, and they're like, go to New York City, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. That sounds horrible. So I'm like, I'm going to make it work in my hometown. So I came back and I started working in Portland, and I worked for a company. I worked for a corporation that had a big publishing arm, and they did trade shows. And I loved that idea of creating content and being able to produce magazines or marketing material and merch and get it out to people that really were excited about it. But I have experience in that corporate environment, and so people that haven't worked for a big company, that don't know what that's like, to be able to speak about it is it's a different world. It's a weird sort of mentality of this hierarchy of management, ownership, profits. Trying to be a creative in that space is very difficult to explain. I'm sure every company is different. I can't speak for any other ones, but I know that my time was very challenging. And so while I was working in Portland, I'm like, I gotta find something that to take my mind off all the stress of being in this corporate environment. So I would walk to the comic book store there in Portland. There's a great one, Coast City. And so I'd go in there and I would just flip through the comics, in my like business attire, and they're like, "Who is this person?" They was very off-putting.
Yuppie flipping through the board.
Yeah, like why is that guy wearing wingtips? They thought I was like some sort of like a spy for them. They told me later. They're like, oh, he's one of the diamond reps. You see enough our displays any good or something. I'm like, no, I was just bored and sad. So I just spent all that time flipping through comics. But what happened was I would go up to the counter and I was like, hey, this comic book's signed. Like somebody signed it. And they're like, yeah, no, there's creators that live in Portland that make comic books. I'm like, that's crazy. What are you talking about? Like that people here can make comic books? I thought this was, a New York or an LA thing. It's still, at that time, I didn't really think that you could, be from Portland, Maine and make content and get it out to the world. And I'm like, that's so, naive now to realize. So then my goal from that point on was to make a comic book and put it in that store. And I would do ash cans, and I'd just sneak them in and stick them on the rack. So then I'd come back in and see if anyone...
You wouldn't even ask them?
No.
Did you not even ask them? Did you just stick it on there?
No. I was too embarrassed to be like, they're just little ash cans. It's like 8.5 by 11 folded in half. I photocopied.
That's awesome. That's like guerrilla marketing 101.
That's so fucking punk rock, Dylan. I love it.
Well, that's the thing is at the time I was in a punk band, so I was singing and playing guitar in punk bands all over Portland. And so we would do that. We would just make flyers and put them up. Like, we're not asking anybody. So we'd make flyers.
What was the name of the band?
Grendel's Army. You can look it up on YouTube.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So was it based off the Matt Wagner comic?
It was. So I love Grendel. Yeah. So, and I had a dog. I named him Grendel after that Matt Wagner comic because I love Matt Wagner's Grendel. And people, they're like, Brindle? I'm like, no, Grendel. So we'd take stickers and we'd sticker all over stuff and we'd tag things and, just be deviants. But we'd play punk shows. And so the idea was like, I'm just going to make these ash cans and stick them in this comic book store. And then like, if someone takes them, I'll be like, that'd be so crazy if someone like took one of my ash cans and they like found me on MySpace, or whatever.
Yeah.
I know. So that was fun. And then I just realized I started meeting up with other creators, and I saw that there were conventions, and I realized that, oh no, I love drawing. I love publishing. I have stories I want to tell. And really, at that time, I was listening to a lot of podcasts about doing Kickstarter. So like Tyler James, who's doing his comic launch
Oh yeah.
podcast. So I was sitting at my corporate office desk, just listening to like hours and hours of instructional podcasts about drawing and marketing and design and illustration and comic book artist interviews and convention interviews. And I'm just like, why am I sitting in this desk? I got to get out and do these things. You know, I felt like I was running out of time. So that's why my output of work has been so. I do a lot of stuff. I make a lot of stuff. I think that if anybody sees my work, I want them to appreciate the fact that the stuff I'm creating, I'm passionate about. I love making content. I love making comic books, and I want to make a lot of awesome stuff. And that's really been my goal. And I started, putting. And I have made comic books. I've made my own. I've just done an artist edition, which I'll show. And right now, this year, 2020 has been strange. It's been a challenge for sure. But I've tried to be really, really productive, and I've tried to really draw every day, all day. And yeah, you were talking about, the pandemic and how it's affected the industry, but I mean, I don't really feel very connected to that bigger industry. I feel like you were saying, like being an independent creator, like, I'm independent. Like
Yeah.
I have people that like my work and support my work, and that's who I'm making stuff for. And I'm very, very
Yeah.
appreciative and very happy that people like what I'm doing. So
So I was
Yeah.
just going to say that, given that a lot of your inspiration, you said, came from the Image era and earlier than that, given somebody who's read your work and I've read Archive,
Me
it's
too.
that work is very much a reflection of your, the inspiration you took from that and your passion for that era of comics. It shines through significantly.
thank you. And I think really what one of the things I've tried to get through to people, or try to have people understand, is that um, I love that era. I love comic books. I love indie work. And the thing about it is I'm critical of my own stuff, and I'm always trying to improve as a storyteller, as an artist, as a creator. But there's the thing about comics is I always feel like there's no good or bad. There's really just what you connect with. And so there's some, like there's Alex Ross paintings, and then there's Eric Larson, Savage Dragon, and that's all incredible. I love all of it, but it's a very wide spectrum of what is possible in this medium. And that's really what I feel. Anyone can create work like this. There's nothing stopping you from getting paper, folding it in half, and just drawing. And
Yeah.
you might create. There was this. There's been comic books that have been like stick figures, that Way of the Stick or something on that Kickstarter that did huge. And there's been comic books where the art, the Schultz's Peanuts, this
Yeah.
very
Well,
simplified.
all that
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm a
There,
fan of all of it.
there's the fumettis, the photo comics from Italy, and
Yeah,
all that old school stuff.
yeah,
There's a wide variety of it. And actually, I was just going to say, just to dial it back a little bit to what you were talking about before, and your discovery of comics with the Wolverine book, Frank Miller's run, and
uh-huh.
looking at it. When you were saying that, it made me actually think back to like basically my first interaction with comics, and then I think it was Claremont's X-Men that I kind of originated. Like being a kid, like all that stuff was so heady, and like even like New Mutants at that time was just so deep and just way above my pay grade as like a experienced individual in this world, that like it was the artwork and it was things like that that kind of hooked me. Images of Nightcrawler, steeped in shadow with like big grins and white eyes, but having a devil's tail, but also still supposed to be like a good guy. Like these things definitely piqued my interest. And it was only
Yeah.
until I got older and started like understanding it and all the pieces come together, and like it just kind of falls on you like a waterfall. It's like, oh my God, this is why this is so good. You know?
Yeah, and with me, my mother's a reading teacher, and my father is an artist. So my mom was like, "Yeah, buy him as many comic books as he can carry. Like he'll, as long as he's reading something,
Yeah.
because my mom knows how important it is to just be reading." And so being able to, I think with kids now, the YA stuff, the Dog Man, those books, they're finding that audience and they're teaching kids, really important stuff about learning and reading and creating. And yeah, I'm a super fan of comics. I think that I'm so optimistic for where comics are going to go, and I think that people right now, obviously with 2020, it's hard to kind of look past where we're at and see what the next 5-10 years are going to look like. But I remember when they first unveiled the iPad. I was saying to Tracy, my wife, I was like, "That's going to be a game changer," and she's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." I'm like, "Okay, before now." There was the Kindle, which was black and white, and you could read books on it. But
Yeah.
this iPad, you're going to read comics on it, and you're going to be able to draw on it. And she was like, "Really? That's going to be a thing?" I'm like, "That's going to be the biggest thing." And I was like, and now even with what I'm doing digitally, like I love drawing on the iPad. I love that feel of
Yeah.
it now. It's such a great machine for drawing and reading. It's. I think really that's going to be, obviously everyone knows that's where we're going, and yeah, I'm excited for it.
Do you have a preference between digital art and like traditional style, or nowadays, or?
Well, the thing is, I loved the traditional stuff and still love working traditionally, um, because growing up reading comics, all those guys were pen and ink guys, and so the stuff I grew up reading, I connect with that. But I realized just how hard that is. It's a very physical activity, and people might not realize that. You guys know, but drawing is a very physical thing, and it's physically difficult and it's time consuming. And if what, like I was saying previously, I want to create a lot of work. I feel that I do my best work when I progress, and my progress comes from creating, not thinking about it, not studying, but just working on things. And so digital speeds me up. And working on stuff right now, I've done the I've done so I'm going to be doing a Kickstarter in early 2021. It's the crossover event for all my characters. It's called Archive Universe. I'm
Oh,
thrilled
cool.
to have them kind of be able to. I've had all these different series, and I wanted to kind of bring them all together and have a big crossover, because that was the thing growing up in the '90s. Like you'd be like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
Spawn's meeting Savage Dragon." You're like, "That's
Yeah.
crazy. That's the coolest thing." So I was like, I want to create that sort of excitement, and so just for myself. And so the idea is it's like a time travel book. So Warhood takes place in the future. That's my sci-fi book. The Oppressors takes place current time. That's like my mercenary Batman sort of feel book. And then Sist, the Skin Grafter, takes place in the past. That's like my sword and sorcery book. I was like, how would I connect all those? What sort of event would occur where they'd have to kind of work in this sort of timeline in this world? So Archive Universe is that. That's the idea that they have a threat and they have to all kind of join forces to fight it. It's super fun. Kickstarter's coming up.
Awesome.
The book is done. And then I also did Oppressors issue 2, which I've finished. And now I'm working on Sist issue 2. That's half done. So
So Dylan, let me stop you there for one second. So when you do like all these different books, do you do like one of one series, and then you do like say you do like an issue of the Oppressors, right? You finish that, and do you go to then you I'll take a break from that and I'll do Sis now. Okay. Yeah, so that's how you work it. Okay.
I read Oppressors with #1 today, and that was fire. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, man, it's so good. It actually reminded me of a couple of other things. I don't know if there's this indie movie that came out, and it went by 2 different names.
Okay.
When they initially released, it was called All Heroes Must Die, and then it became Versus, and then I saw one of your character names was Versus, and then it was like the concept of that movie was like, imagine like Saw but with superheroes.
Cool.
And I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's a little bit like that, but I think you took it like another step further, because you really genuinely steeped it in superhero mythologies. The characters had the capes. They had they looked like the comic characters genuinely of yesteryear. So you hit the nail on the head with that one. And I think if the idea of superheroes in Saw has any appeal to anybody watching, I'd say, pick up Oppressors. That's really
Thank you.
an awesome book.
Yeah.
That's very, very nice. And I'm super excited to show you issue 2, because I take that to the next level. But the thing is,
Can you tease any of that? Do you have any of that handy by any chance?
I don't have any around me. But the thing about the Oppressors, which I loved, was what I created. Well, because I'm sitting at a convention like everybody does, and you're drawing commissions, drawing sketches or whatever, and you just start kind of daydreaming. It's like, well, what would my Batman story be, right? Everybody should have like if you're a creator and you're in the elevator with, with Scott Snyder, and he's like, "What's your Batman pitch?" And I'm like, "All right, my Batman pitch." So I started thinking, I'm like, "All right, it's Batman and Red Hood, and they have to escape from Arkham Asylum because like Lex Luthor trapped him there." And so that was just the idea. And I'm like, okay, well, DC's never going to pay me to make a Batman and Red Hood escape from Arkham Asylum book. So I was like, well, I'll just make it my own thing. And so that's the Oppressors. So it's my idea of a Batman style character, a vigilante who's retired, who's been trapped by Vulgarian, who's kind of like a Lex Luthor sort of evil genius. And he's trapped there with his young sidekick who's now grown up, who's Spine. That's my character, Spine. And the idea of this father-son relationship, I really wanted to kind of tap into, where the old retired guy versus wants to prove he can still do it. He wants to teach the kid a lesson and show him how it's done. But the protege has grown up underneath this jerk, this vigilante, this guy who's been pushing him around. And so he wants to prove he doesn't need him anymore. And then Vulgarian, who's just he thinks he's the police. The Vulgarian thinks he's the authority in all of this and feels as though he's meant to keep these vicious criminals in this prison. And what happens when you put them under a 24-hour clock? Like, you got 24 hours to get out of this prison.
Yeah.
Can you work together, this father-son team? What would you encounter? And I want it to be kind of like a video game. So they're in the crate is the name of the prison that they're in, and it's an island prison, and they're underground. And so each level they go up and out. So I'm like, all right, like a video game, like you got to battle up and then you fight a boss, and then you battle up and fight a boss. So I was like, all right, what about if each issue had 2 bosses and it was 6 hours? I'm like, that makes sense. And so,
I like that.
yeah, that's how I structured it. And so for issue 2, I was like, yeah, let's just keep going with that sort of feel. I think once it's collected, it'll be like, oh, I see where you're having them up and try to go out, and they have to fight big boss battles. And it's been really fun to draw. It's been a great way to kind of draw like tech, like interiors of a prison, and as it's destroyed, like how would that sort of react with the characters, and as it gets more dangerous as they get up because it's more destroyed, and then them sort of bickering, which I enjoy that sort of dialogue.
I like to, because I've read it as well, Dylan, and I enjoyed it as well. It's my kind of story because I like seeing superheroes. I like seeing action, and I love that it's I call it like a trial by fire. Like you're just thrown into the story, and you're like, what is going on? But then you start kind of unveiling what's happening little by little.
Yeah,
and that's what I liked about it a lot.
And the thing is, I mean,
a little bit at a time. I like that for sure.
Yeah, it's a fun way to kind of play with that, because this thing is with comic books, as you guys know, like the panels are like a freeze frame. So every panel is a freeze frame of the action, like someone's taking a photo with a flash. They're snapped in that sort of frozen moment, and the time occurs between the panels and the gutters. And so, like with a punch, like you see them coil back and you see them follow through, and that impact happens in that gutter in between the panels. And so I was like, how can I kind of play with time in this? How would you move these characters through this environment in this amount of time? So I really enjoy that. And also, I love Savage Dragon. I love Eric Larson's Savage Dragon. And I feel as though with that book, Eric was like, I'm just going to have these characters go through these horrible things and have to really overcome terrible situations. But since these are my characters, I can do whatever I want. They could die, they could live, they could betray each other, they could team up. Like, there's really nothing set in stone, because the thing is with corporate comics, with like Batman, it's always act 2, right? The origin, Batman's parents were shot. There's never going to be a finale. They're never going to end it. It's never going to be the end. There's no more Batman comics. It's always going to be that middle act. And so the thing is, whether good things or bad things happen to them, they're always going to reset to that middle act. And with me, I don't have that constraint. And I think with a lot of those Image guys, Eric Larson, Savage Dragon, anything can happen, and you don't know what's going to happen when you flip that page, and the reveal could be that he's dead, and that's the story. I think and with Eric Larson, he manipulates time also, because his characters age in real time, and that idea that it's like, oh, they have to deal with current events. Like, I think that's fascinating. And
That's
so,
cool. Yeah, I like that too.
yeah, so I think there's a lot of power in that. I think there's a lot of, and like we are saying with comic books, they can be anything. And so the creativity is really in the where can I take this? And I love that.
So one more thing I want to mention. Keith, can you scroll down just a little bit on that page? Just a tiny smidge.
Yeah, that
No,
one.
go back to the other page. It was cut off right there. Written, drawn, created by Dylan Andrews.
Yeah.
I always have to commend individuals who do it all because that's a lot of work. Just to be a writer alone is a lot of work, and then you have to actually illustrate the project itself.
Yeah, what's good about it is you
all
save
that
a lot of money.
Well, let me tell you, and that's the thing about being an independent creator and being a self-publisher is that I initially was like, well, maybe I'll get somebody else to, write something. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll get somebody else to draw stuff. And I was like, well, I could hire a letterer or a colorist. And I'm like, well, then at that point, why don't I just buy a comic book? If I'm not doing any of it, then what am I making at that point? And I might as well just go buy comics. Like, if I'm going to make a comic, I want to try to get good at all the parts of it because I'm fascinated by all the parts of it. And so that was really the idea behind it. And then also with that, do you ever read Kare Andrews, Renato Jones, The 1%? He did for Image a book called Renato Jones, Kare Andrews, and he does that in the insides, like written, drawn, owned by Kare Andrews. And so I messaged him like, "Hey, I'm an Andrews. Like, you're like a really." Like,
I haven't read that, but I have read his Iron Fist stuff.
Yeah, same.
And that was incredible.
And like he does everything. And so he did Iron Fist. He wrote it and drew it.
I never thought Iron Fist would work as a dark character, but oh my god, it was fantastic.
If you liked Iron Fist, Renato Jones is phenomenal.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Similar sort of style. He's using that similar sort of digital cartoony anime style. So good. And so I realized when he was like, I do it all, I was like, I could do it all too. So I'm going to do it all. So that was really why I wanted to create all of it. And of course, now I've gotten to the point where I want colorists. I like to work with colorists just because I like seeing how people interpret my work. But the idea of just being a penciler and hiring inkers, it's like, I don't know, I'd like to learn how to ink, and then it's like, well, I should get good at penciling too. And lettering's kind of interesting. It's, maybe not the part I enjoy the most, but I can do it pretty quickly. So, and you guys have read through the book, so it's readable.
Is there an aspect that's a little bit more challenging you feel than others, or do you kind of just equally take it in stride?
The thing about creating is every day there's new challenges, and every day I feel as though I want to improve on all aspects, but usually it's the things towards the end. The lettering usually comes at the end. That's where I usually write dialogue. Like when I'm scripting things initially, I'm pretty loose with, it's similar to that Eric Larson Savage Dragon. Like, let's just start and see where we end up. And then I rough out the whole book, and I do all the layouts. And then I'll go back through and do a pass with pencils, like a digital pencil. And then I'll go back through and do a pass digitally inking. That's my current workflow, all on the iPad. And then bring that into a layout program and do the lettering. But what I'm really excited about right now is on my Patreon at makecomicscool.com, every Tuesday at 10 a.m., dropping a new page, full color. And that's kind of something I haven't done before. It's always felt kind of indie and always been kind of early Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Walking Dead. Like, I like that black and white comic book look. And so I wanted to do that. But I'm like, if I just do a digital book and provide those pages every week digitally, I could do them in color. And so I actually got a colorist to do the entire book in color at makecomicscool.com. Every Tuesday, 10 a.m., you get a new page. So if you jump in for $1, you'll have a full comic book by the time, everything's said and done digitally. So I'm pretty psyched about that.
That's great. That's pretty cool. I hope people actually take the time to, to check that out. And that's cool because even like web comics and digital comics of that type are becoming more and more popular these days too, which is good. The other thing I was going to say is that, as an independent creator and somebody who kind of has to self-market themselves, the one thing I can say about, in the time that I spend on social media, I do see that you do go live frequently. You do share a lot of your creative processes and works, and you connect with your audience, and you connect with your friends, and you connect with your fan bases a lot. And that's very important. I think a lot of creative types get so isolated in the work themselves that they forget that that's all part of the process as well.
Yeah, and I think with me, it was a matter of looking at the people I was a fan of and am a fan of. So when I saw online people posting their work, like David Finch doing, his YouTube draw-alongs now, I'm like, that's crazy. The fact that
Yeah,
you
that's
can
awesome.
just watch him draw an entire page, like, oh my God, like and there's no barrier between him and the people that like his work. That's incredible that we have that ability now to be able to create something and then share it immediately, like that digital comic I'm doing for Patreon. It's like there's nothing stopping me from, if people want it, I can make it and share it, and then that enables me to make more things. And that's always what it comes down to. I heard Todd McFarlane interviewed, and he was saying that any day I wake up and I don't have to go to an office, I can just create, I can draw. Like that's the goal, and that's
Yeah,
the goal.
right.
that's,
Yeah,
that's
that's what we're
really
all
it.
working towards.
Yeah.
And like, marketing is so important, I think, as an indie creator, because you gotta, even if you're an introvert, it's half the thing about being successful,
Well, what I did, I'll give you another little tip. I'm probably sharing too much at this point. I'm oversharing, but right. With me, I am a very shy, quiet, introverted person. With conventions, I try to be really outgoing and talkative, and if
You
Todd
are.
would, thank you.
You're
I
very
try.
nice.
You guys are great.
I
I
think
love talking with you guys.
me, Dylan, because I know, like, you don't go around. Like I said, you definitely say hi to people and you network. So to say that you're shy is like, I feel like you're lying to me.
Well, that's the thing, is that when I was in bands, right? So I'd have to get on stage and sing and play guitar and yell and try to get psyched up, and so you kind of have to do this performance. And so with me being in punk rock bands or being on stage, it was like, well, you kind of create this punk rock well, I love Joe Strummer. It's like Billy Idol. This idea that you would have a punk rock name, so I created Dylan Distraction, right? So I was like, I'm just this distraction. That's great. That's a distract. That sounds cool. So I was like, the persona will be that Dylan Distraction persona, and people now they get a kick out of it, but they know me. They're like, you're pretty quiet and shy, and you just want to draw alone in your room by yourself. It's funny that you've created this persona that's very outgoing and pleasant. I'm like, yeah, I know. It's all just kind of part of the show. So yeah, that's part of the branding. Yeah.
Well, I
And
think
I
a
don't
positive
want to think of
attitude
it.
is huge.
And that's the thing, is I don't want to think of it like it's phony or not or fake. It's all part of me. I like talking comic books. Obviously, I could talk
Yeah.
comic books forever, but there is that sort of like, how do you want to be? How do you want people to know your work? And it's like, well, I want them to be excited about it. I want them to see the energy and enthusiasm I have. And so you have to be energetic and enthusiastic about it. If I came on
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, everything's so hard and it's so rough and it's so
It's
brutal.
true. It's true. I used to just sit, like when I first started doing conventions, because I got an introverted personality as well. But I used to just sit there and kind of wait for people to come over.
Right.
And I'm not like a car salesman type either.
Right.
So like nowadays, the way I do conventions is like I'm standing up, I'm waiting for people to come over, and then we just talk about anything. And then I find that the best selling is just talking to somebody and not even really worrying about if you're going to sell a book or not.
Right.
Just enjoy the person. And I find that 9 out of 10 times they'll just buy your book because they like you. You know what I mean?
And I learned that by going to cons and hanging out with other creators in Portland. I shared a studio with Ben Bishop and Joe Schmalke, and you'd been doing it for longer than me. And then just seeing how, if you're excited and you're upbeat and you're, if people will respond to that, because it's true. Like, I am genuinely excited about the work I'm producing. And if people come over and they're like, what's this about? I'm like, well, let me tell you about it, because this is all I've been thinking about. Please, someone talk to me about this. I want to tell you what I'm working on.
That's great.
So that's definitely part of it.
It looks like I may have missed a question from the comments here. Big shout out to Patrick Iverson, by the way. Thanks for watching. But he says, what do you feel is a better program to run on an iPad for comic work? Do you use an iPad?
I do. I use iPad. I use Procreate for everything. I've used Clip Studio, which I think is awesome. Clip Studio offers a lot of really great tools for creating. But if you're just looking to do comic book work, there's a new program that I've been trying out, which I don't know the name off the top of my head.
Is that the Procreate?
Procreate's great. Yeah, I use Procreate. That's free. I think it's free, or it's very inexpensive. Definitely use Procreate. That's the kind of the one everybody's really enjoying right now. It has great brush um, adjustment abilities, capabilities. So you can bring in brushes or buy brushes and then adjust them and really get the kind of lines you want. Because that's always the thing with me where I want my digital to replicate my traditional as much as possible. So you were asking me earlier, like, what do I prefer? I love when you can't tell. And I know that's kind of strange, but I
Yeah.
love if you look at my work and you're like, did he, how was this created? I like that sort of it. I want to be able to use both things interchangeably because I love the look and feel of, pen and ink and ink wash and colored pencils and paper. And I think digitally you can kind of replicate a lot of that now, and it doesn't feel as stiff maybe as it used to, or as fake. I don't know if that's a good word for it, but it's
No,
as
I know what you're
crisp.
saying.
Yeah, like I'll draw, and people be like, "What kind of brush is that?" I'll be like, "I don't know. I just kept modifying some brush I found until I got it to kind of where I want it." And
Right.
it's like I'm sure I'll keep changing it. It's rarely stays static for very long. I'm always trying new tools and buying new equipment. I mean, if you look at my studio, it's just filled with different pens and pencils. Like I'm like, oh, you got to try these. You got to try that one. It's just like, oh yeah, I got so many pens. Like,
Yeah.
I saw one guy use an eraser like this, so I had to buy a box of them. Like it's just craziness. Like, oh, I put these little grips on all my pencils because I got huge
Oh yeah,
hands.
yeah, yep.
So it's all just nerdy art stuff.
So on the flip side of that, we're looking at maybe your creative process and execution for writing and developing story. Do you have any tricks or programs, things you lean on, or things that you do in your sandbox specific to you in the writing process?
When I'm creating, I want to try to keep it as fun as possible, and I've looked at artists' work and I've talked to professionals, people that are working on stuff. And often, if there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, it's a committee. And that's another thing Kari Andrews has said. He's like, you never, you don't, it's hard to create something important or special if there's by committee. And so when I'm writing, I don't like go, oh, I'm just writing now. And then I'm going to switch flip that switch and just pencil now. And then flip that switch and just ink. It's always kind of happening at the same time, and I think that's that sort of Eric Larson vibe where I have the characters, I know where I want them to get to, and I'm going to try to put them in really difficult situations, and have them try to overcome challenges, build relationships, but then draw stuff that's fun. If I'm not going to skimp out, and if I feel like they need to fight a robot for 4 pages, yeah, they're going to fight a robot for 4 pages. That sounds like it's
I
fun
like
to
that.
draw. I'm
So
not.
when you put the words down, though, I mean, do you do like an outline first? Do you kind of, or is everything up in your head and you just kind of like put it down on paper as it goes?
What I've done most recently is letter the dialogue on the page. So Marvel method sort of where if I have a guy going like then he's probably like what? And so I know how they're like. I know the situation I put them in, and so I'll write some different dialogue and try and then come back to it. So I'll sit with it, like you were saying, like I can jump around from book to book. So
I do that a lot too,
yeah,
actually.
and then
But
I'll
it's
come back the
more
next
like
day.
I look at it more like whenever because I hire out a lot of artists.
Right.
What I end up doing is when the issue's done, I'll print it all out and then I'll put it in a binder and I'll read it and I'll go through it and see how it feels like, as it flows, like as a reader, and then I go back and I'll mark it up as certain areas where I need to work on the dialogue a little more, or you know what I mean, just change some stuff up.
Yeah,
So I
and
get that kind of aspect of it.
I think too with I don't know. Can you see what I'm doing here?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me make you
Yeah,
bigger.
zoom in if you can.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'll show you just kind of, I mean, to speak
Cool.
specifically about it, I just did this for my Patreon patrons. It's Versus Strikes Back. This is the black and white cover. I don't know if I have the color cover over here, but this was a really fun experiment. I did it as a wordless comic.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's like the GI Joe silent issue.
Yeah, so the idea behind that was with this one, how can I tell a story? And there's that, yeah, that guy, I know that guy. And so, how can I tell a story that's fun, that's action, that has this character versus, and how can I
Oh,
put
I
them in
like it.
situations that are challenging? But I wanted to. You ever read Dark Knight Strikes Again, the Frank Miller book?
Yeah. Yep.
That's the
Yeah,
second one.
yeah, the second one, DK2. And so you look at that, and Lynn Varley did the colors on that, and it looks insane. And so I've heard that the story is that Alex Sinclair, the colorist for Jim Lee, trained Lynn Varley and met with Frank Miller, and they had her do the colors in that book, and he taught her how to use Photoshop. And so the colors in that book look nuts, and I love it. It looks like a fever dream. But they released a version of Dark Knight Strikes Again in black and white, and it's crazy good. It just feels like you get these really thick, chunky lines. Frank Miller did no real sort of work in background. Like the backgrounds are really crazy. It's kind of like a Sin City version of Batman. And so I was like, well, I want to do something like that. And so what I did is Versus Strikes Back, which is kind of my play on Strikes Again. And I did it wordless because I didn't want to get bogged down in trying to tell the story in words. I just wanted to tell it visually. So that was for Patreon patrons. I did the color cover and the black and white cover. Those were really well received. But then what I'm doing this next month, this comic book now has captions, it has narration, and it's going to be in full color. And that's the pages that are dropping every Tuesday at 10 a.m. at Make Comics Cool. So you'll get to see this comic book in full color, which looks crazy. The colors
Awesome.
makes it look nuts. And I'm really excited to have that. So those are available at my Patreon. And so that's how I did that one. But then, so like books like The Oppressors, yeah, this book I did the dialogue, and I wanted it to be these characters had to speak to each other in order to progress the story along, because the story in that is a little bit more complex. And then with Cyst, similar sort of Marvel method where I would do dialogue after laying out all the pages. So I drew it knowing what was going to be happening and where they're going to be going, and then do in dialogue after. And
I love it.
yeah, that's kind of a fun way to do it. It makes it less rigid for me. It's less strict as far as how I can create, and so I like that sort of freedom.
Yeah, no, I like what you're doing. I love the artwork, and I love that you can tell it's so inspired by Image stuff, which I love.
Absolutely, it's 100%. Like I'm falling back to the '90s, flipping through the pages for sure.
Thank you. And I think that really I want people to have that sort of feeling of nostalgia, but I don't want it to feel old fashioned or outdated. I want it to feel, and I think too with what I'm trying to do with like Warhood and Archive, reading those books, I think people didn't realize that the characters would be as flawed as they are. Like Era Naled, my main character who has the Warhood in that book, he's really not very heroic. Through that book, primarily he's being saved by Tachi, as the woman, the female character, and I don't think people really were expecting him to be so helpless, because if you read a lot of those '90s books, it's a real. It seems like it's a lot of macho, masculine, aggressive
Yeah, yeah,
violence. I think was really the criticism a lot of that stuff probably got. And with me, I was like, well, I want it to feel like a '90s book in the sense that it's
like splash
energetic
pages and huge
yeah,
action
action.
scenes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're never sitting in a coffee shop,
yeah.
chatting for 4 panels
I
or four
love that
pages.
though, because everybody else is doing the coffee shop chat fest.
Right. And
The
that's the thing is,
main comics
the
are
reason
doing
why,
that.
well, that's the thing is the stuff I'm doing, I don't think my stuff would be good. Like I think that people can do that great. But I don't think my stuff would make sense. I mean, it would be really hard to draw that, and really probably pretty difficult to make it
It's usually
interesting.
boring though too to just sit there and watch
To do it
talking
well is
heads.
really, really
It's like
hard.
you might as well write a play at that point, you know?
So it's like deconstruction of comics once again, like Dark Knight Returns, to go back to what you're saying, was like the deconstruction of the superhero and the comic books for that time. Well, now we've reached that again, except it's like, let's make our superhero comic books more like Friends, the TV series.
Right. But if you can do that, like I am so in awe of people who can do that well, where
Right.
they go, oh man,
There's
this
certain
comic
people
book,
that can write that.
this comic book is going to be people talking about their problems, and it's going to be interesting, like Stray Bullets. Do you ever read
Yeah, I love
yeah.
Stray Bullets.
So David Lapham's Stray Bullets. If you reread some of those, you're like, oh, this is just people in a normal everyday life. There's really nothing very heroic about any of these characters. They're dealing with really mundane situations. But again, it gets to that point where it's like kind of Sopranos-y, where almost it feels like or Breaking Bad maybe, where it's always, whenever I was reading that as a kid, I always felt like something bad could happen at any moment.
At any point, yeah.
And
yeah, definitely.
if you kind of have that sort of dread, and you can have people talking in a coffee shop if at some point you think a car might drive through the front door and smash everything. There's that sort of, you don't know what's going to happen next. And with Stray Bullets particularly, if you want to read a comic book that does that sort of everyday life story well, I mean, it's so hard to pull that off and make it compelling and visually interesting. And I definitely think that book is one of those ones that maybe people lost track of, but I go back to
I
it
love
often.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I still collect it when he puts out new issues on
Right.
Image.
Yeah, it's Image. I got the giant omnibus one.
Yeah, me too.
I got it with a head sketch in it. Oh, did you get yours with a head sketch? Nope.
I didn't. No, I don't think I ordered it from him. I think I actually got it through Diamond when it first came out. I was like, I need that.
Yeah, it's great. I mean,
I had some of the. I only had, I was missing issues from the original run, so I was like, I need that collection.
Well, I remember I grew up reading that in Sin City, and I realized how much those comic books kind of got into my head. Where this idea that
similar kind of stories. I mean, except that Sin City's a little more darker and a little more crime ridden.
Yeah,
Stray Bullets seems to have a little more downtime in between the crime.
I remember that first story in Stray Bullets where the guy has a gun and he's like,
I love that one.
And he's talking to the dead body, and it's like, what? Like, I was like 10 years old. I'm like, what is going on? It was really.
And then then they pull it back, and you see him when he's a kid, and you're like, what?
Yeah. So I think it can be done. I don't think I'm the person to do those kind of stories, but I'm always impressed when people can pull it off and make it compelling. For sure.
I agree. And
do you find yourself wanting to push out of your comfort zone or doing things that might be a little bit against your norm typically? Or do you kind of like know your boundary and know your limit and kind of like strive within that circle, do you think?
It's funny you mentioned that. I've heard people say like, you got to push yourself or comfort zone. I wonder, it's like, well, what would a comfort zone be? I don't even, it's such a, all of this seems really challenging. So there's never, there's never
I'm already uncomfortable. I don't want to make it worse.
Right. That's the thing, is it's like, what's comfort? I don't know. Like, I draw 10 hours a day. I'm usually rarely thrilled with what I produce just because I'm so critical of my own work. At no point am I going, oh, this is easy, I'm on autopilot now. It always feels like it's you're pushing that rock up the hill, and I don't want people to get that impression like that it's I'm not digging ditches, but this idea that I'm always striving to create good work, and I think that means that you have to fall into things that you're familiar with, right? Like I try to draw things consistently. I want to have my anatomy or my facial expressions or hands or backgrounds or the different sort of technology I'm trying to incorporate or any of those sort of things. I want it to be consistent over the book, and so I, especially in, you got 22, 24 pages. I don't have a lot of time to experiment and make stuff that's completely off the rails, because it's like it'll take people out of the story. I would,
you want it. I'm like in the philosophy, and I know I usually don't make comics for myself. I make characters that I really like, but I'm always thinking about entertaining an audience, you know. So it's like I'm always trying to create like a story that has heroic characters and like cool situations, or maybe have some good character development moments in
Right.
between all the action, you know, things like that.
And you write and draw your own stuff. Have you ever had people like I've had instances and where it's like, well, you should draw that, the coffee scene and them sitting in a park talking over a bag of popcorn, and that's how you'll level up. And it's like I guess I sure. I mean, but that's not a comic book I would want me to make,
Yeah, I
because it's
wouldn't
not a
want
comic
to.
book I'd want to read
Yeah,
necessarily. So I think with what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to balance that where I want there to be um, quality, and consistency, and fun and entertainment. I want it to be exciting and inspiring, and really what I would want people to take away from it. And I think again, what connected me to all those image artists was, it's like, oh, anybody can create comic books, and I want people to see my work and feel like, oh, I get what he's doing. I can do that. I could make a comic book. It's like, yeah, anybody can make a comic book. You got a story to tell. You got some paper and some pencils.
yeah.
Start making something.
The only thing holding you back is you have to do the work. You know, like
Yeah.
I get so many people at conventions that come up and say, "Oh, I have this great idea," and it's like, well, go out and make it. You know,
Yeah.
because no one's going to care about it unless you actually take the time and make it. You know.
Yeah, I think that there's that disconnect between the they don't realize how much time goes into a lot of this stuff, and I think I see that too with my own things. I'm like, if I used to do a Kickstarter and then think like, oh, I can bang out a Kickstarter. I'll do a Kickstarter campaign for this book, and then I'll bang out the book in like a month, and then do fulfillment. Bam, no problem. And
Yeah.
what I realized was, oh no, I have to have a lot of it in the can, because I overestimate how quickly I can create content.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so this year, 2020, has been beneficial in the sense that since we're not traveling to conventions and we're not going, going to comic book stores, or I'm not going to a studio, I'm working from home. It's really enabled me to try to get a jump on everything, so that when I come out of this, people will go, wow, he's got such a huge body of work. And it's like, yeah, it's just because I took the
Yeah.
time.
You're
Yeah.
doing this full time now, Dylan, right? This is your full time thing, or
Yeah, this is what I'm doing. I'm making content, and I do. The thing is, like, I think people have this misconception that you will do one thing and that's your thing.
right?
With me, it's like, oh no, I've been freelance for years, and you have to have 7 sources of revenue. And so I will tell anyone right now who wants to get into whatever you're doing, if you're freelance, you have to have 7 sources of revenue. And I know that seems like really 7, but if you count it up, if you're a carpenter, you got to
It's
have.
always like feast or famine. I've heard with freelancers, right?
Yeah, that's the thing, is I've been doing it for a while now, and so you just kind of have to create your own opportunities. And I do Patreon, I do Kickstarter, I'll do commissions, I do conventions, I do freelance graphic design, I do anything. I work with other creators who want to have me do character designs or studies or anything. And going to be trying to do a little bit of teaching coming up, which I'm really excited about.
Oh,
So
cool. Nice.
yes, I like the idea of having a lot of different sort of fuel in the fire. What do they say? Rods in the
Yeah.
fire. I like to have a lot of fire in the fire.
Iron the
So
fire.
I like to have
One thing,
everything cooking.
one thing I wanted to ask you, Dylan, yeah, I noticed your imprint is Batlantic Studios.
Yeah.
What's the source of the name? Like,
Yeah. So the thinking behind that was, I'm on the Atlantic, and so I'm like, and I love Batman. So I was like, well, I could do like. This idea was like, well, it's Batman on the Atlantic. What if I did so it's like Batlantic, and then the idea behind it was, if I make up a word,
Okay.
then you hear a lot of people are like, oh, something something comics or so and so studios, and it's like, well, that's a thing. Like, someone else could have used that. But if you make up a word, no one's used a word I've made up. So,
Yeah, right.
so that was another idea behind the marketing. And at first, people were like, "What is that?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's just Atlantic, like with bats. I don't know." So, and the other idea too, and I'll be completely honest with you, I was like, well, if Dylan Andrews fails, right? Dylan Andrews Publishing fails, I'll take that personally. But if Batlantic Studios goes under, whatever, I'll just create another studio. It's like Mirage. Like Mirage Studios was a fake thing. It's a mirage. And so Batlantic was like, well, if Batlantic's garbage and nobody likes it, it's not like they hated Dylan Andrews Studios. So be less personal.
Yeah, that's true. I like that. It's much like my imprint is Reckless Sidekick, and I think I got that just from. I remember just trying to come up with a name, and I was like, "Oh, how am I going to do this?" And I just remember cracking open comics and just going through comics and looking at different like word balloons, and then like I saw the word Reckless Sidekick, and I was like, "That's it."
Yeah, that's a good one for sure. I like that a lot. Yeah, and the great thing too about making up words, it's kind of like being in a band where you are stuck with it, and then you're like, "Oh man, why did I call my band Green Day?" Like, oh, but
Yeah,
then
right.
people are like, "That's the greatest band name ever," and it's like, really, it was just a stupid joke. Like, I
Yeah,
don't think people like it.
that's exact. Well, so people don't like it, but my when I started doing like the indie film stuff and like the web series and music videos, production company was called Showy Productions, but it's spelled SCHJOAY,
Cool.
which doesn't make sense at all and confuses the shit out of everybody.
Right. But you could probably get the URL. You're like, that's a word I made up,
Yes,
so I can get the
100%
URL because
URL.
same thing with Batlantic. It's like that's not a thing. I mean, unless someone else created this other this word that means nothing, I think I can get the URL. So
Right.
Batlantic Studios was available. I'm like, hey, there you go. So
That's
yeah, go to
great.
BatlanticStudios.com, MakeComicsCool.com if you want to get one of these awesome artist editions. These 11 by 17 artist editions. I'll show you this quick.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's this. So I noticed on your Patreon you have different levels.
Yeah.
Is it? Did you want to like kind of talk about that a little bit in case somebody in our audience wants to back you?
Yeah, so what I've done is I really wanted to during this time since we're not doing conventions and I wanted to be able to provide content on a monthly schedule. And so the
Okay.
idea behind it was all the artists I grew up reading were trying to get monthly comic books, like 12 issues a year, which sounds crazy now.
Yeah.
But at the time, it's like, that's kind of, when the assembly line was really bumping, people were able to produce content, on a pretty consistent schedule. So this idea is like, well, if I have like a subscription, like Patreon, where people pay every month, I can provide them with some really cool stuff if I know there are people that want it. And so the first month that I started really doing this initiative, I did Versus Strikes Back comic. So everybody that signed up for my Patreon that month got that comic. And then I knew I'd have to kind of pace out my stuff. So the next month was T-shirts. Everybody got Warhood T-shirts.
Oh,
And
cool.
I mean, people are like, that's cool. So I'm like, if merch is more your thing, then that's, people stuck around for that. This month is Ink It Up, the artwork of Dylan Andrews, my 11 by 17 artist edition. That's the front cover, and then that's the back cover. And I'm doing a head sketch inside of one now. I left a
Oh,
blank.
cool. So they get the book and they get a head sketch.
Different levels. So if you're at the higher level, you get the commission inside. And the great thing about this artist edition is it looks exactly like my art. So
Oh, cool.
it's
Very cool, man.
Yeah, so you can see all the the pencil lines underneath, and you can see all the gradient I'm using. It's straight scans from my commissions I've
awesome.
done.
Awesome.
Quite a few pages.
Great idea that you kept all that stuff.
Yeah, so people got commissions, and I scanned them and made this 11 by 17
That's awesome.
art
So
book.
it's genius too because you created the artwork for the person who originally purchased it. Plus now you're repurposing it to sell it to other people, which is great idea. Great
that's
idea.
The way
man.
comic books have been because every other, people would make a page. They do, Todd McFarlane would draw a page of Spawn, and then he'd done Spider-Man, but he'd sell those pages. He didn't sell any of his Spawn pages. But artists have been selling originals of printed work forever. That's kind of the way you can do it. I mean, that's how this makes sense. I have to be able to repurpose stuff, and it's been great. The response has been really good, and people that own some of the original art in the book are like, "Hey, that's my drawing." I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "That's awesome." They're like,
That's
hey, I'm that
great.
original. I'm like, yeah.
That's how you build a fan base. So yeah, definitely. Everybody should check out Dylan's Patreon
Yeah,
here.
makecomicscool.com is the Patreon. Batlantic store if you want to, just get books. I have a bunch of books up there, my series, and I'm going to be doing a Kickstarter for the crossover early next year. And but the Patreon's really been a lot of fun. That's a great way to be able to provide content pretty consistently. And if you just sign up for $1, you can get a lot of behind the scenes, and you get that Versus Strikes Back full color comic dropping a new page every Tuesday at 10 a.m. So
Awesome. That's great. And this sketch came out great too. Is this one of your characters?
this is Deathstroke, one of the
Oh, okay. I can see it
characters.
now.
Yeah, so he's got that.
Nice.
I'm going to work on it, try to pull out this side a little bit darker, but so I did Deathstroke, and here I do a lot of these faceless characters where they got masks. And then this one I did Grendel Prime.
Oh, nice.
Wagner's Grendel. Yeah,
That's
that was
so
a fun
great.
one. So I try to do characters like that I enjoy drawing.
One of the my most favorite pieces of artwork anyone's ever done for me is the Max that you drew for me at a convention once.
Oh yeah, I love seeing you at conventions. You would make me you'd make me coffee, and that was always the highlight of my show. I always enjoy seeing both of you guys. It's always so great to see.
Yeah,
you.
I know. And we haven't known each other as long as probably you and Johnny. I think I've known you for maybe about a year now.
Yeah.
And
It's
just every time I see you, it's just nice to see you. And
But
you know,
you guys have been in proximity because as
we have, like we've been.
you guys were across from each other at New York Comic Con.
That's
Yeah,
true. That was a
and I
crazy
think
show.
we talked to you for a little bit, right? At that show, I believe.
Yeah, that was I like doing those shows, and that's the thing when you were like, "Hey, you want to come on?" I was like, "I haven't talked to other creators in a while. It's nice to hear what other people are working on."
Yeah,
And be able to
definitely.
connect with people, because that's the thing, is those conventions is really, for me, it's the way to be able to see what other people are doing and what's working and what successes they've had. So is there any things you guys want to talk about what you're working on? I'd love to hear what you guys are working on.
I like you. I've been using 2020 to actually launch this YouTube channel, which we've done since like the pandemic started in March.
Yeah.
And then also I did an Indiegogo for the next 3 issues of Mighty Mascots. So I'm currently working on those right now, trying to get those out. And Johnny, what do you? I know you got some stuff going on too, right? You got new issues of Sartana and Surrounded by Death, right?
Yeah, so so Sartana 2's out. I'm currently doing a Kickstarter that's like, well, it's not active, but I'm building one, and I'm going to launch like early next year for Surrounded by Death, and what that's going to encompass is Surrounded by Death 1, 2, and a pre-order for 3.
Cool.
It's also going to be like a big wave of like coffee that's going to be available for everybody, because that's what like the book's tied to, and that'll actually be like the end of the coffee arc, because issues
no.
3 are
No, that's my favorite thing.
All about the Espresso Presto saga, and then we're going to move on to our next thing.
You could probably build in a graphic novel of the 3 issues there too, Johnny.
Well, so they're 2-issue story arcs. So the pre-order for 3 is kind of going to be like, if you want like a cheaper pre-order for 3, you can hop in now. That's cool. Going to kind of be the thing I'm going to do for that. And then on top of that, I guess I can talk about it now, is that I just finished writing issue 2 of Advent Dark for Dark Scream Studios.
Cool.
It's a sci-fi, for lack of a better like description, imagine BPRD, but like the Hellboy is from space and it's a woman.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like that's kind of cool. And I wrote his issue 2 for that. So that's like, I literally finished that yesterday.
That's awesome.
And then
so you keep him busy too, which is great.
Yeah, and then I have another project that's kind of like a little hush hush in the terms of like what I'm trying to do with it, but it's a body horror story.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, the thing about, horror stuff is just really big right now, which is awesome. I think that everybody saw the success of The Walking Dead, and they're like, how can we, that's a huge market for that sort of genre of book, that sort of scary stuff. And I love Spawn, so this idea that's I like the idea of adult scary comics. I think that's really cool. That's exciting that you're going to be. I think that's a great way to put your stuff out there for sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah,
this
definitely.
this one shot thing or whatever it's going to be is the best way I can describe, or the best inspiration I can say that comes from it is I don't know if anybody's ever seen this movie, but it's called Tetsuo, the Iron Man.
Oh yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen
yeah,
it.
so that's kind of like like the underlying theme there. So just to give
Cool.
perspective.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're actually at an hour and 10 minutes, so we should probably start wrapping this up.
One of our
I,
longer episodes, but it's been a really good one.
yeah, it's been nice. I think this is a first for us. We've never had anybody do a draw one of their commissions on the show, which is great.
Yeah, I love. That's the thing is, whenever I'm at shows, I'm always usually drawing, and I usually try to stand and talk and draw. And I always think that at some point, I know with me, if like with that Dave Finch drawing tutorial, that stuff he's doing on YouTube, if it was just him talking, at some point I'd be like, all right, I know what Dave Finch looks like. I don't need to see him just talk into the camera. So I was like, I'm going to try to work it so that when I do any of these sort of things, I can try to draw, because I know at some point I'll get sick of looking at myself and I'll be like, I can't look at my own face anymore. I can't look at my expressions. Why are my eyebrows looking like? What am I doing? So
Yeah, I've seen enough.
I've seen enough of
Well,
me.
I think our audience will appreciate it, though,
Good.
seeing it just drawn from scratch, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's good too. I get some work done at the same time, so it's even better. Look at that.
Yeah, definitely. So to wrap up, make sure you go check out Dylan's Patreon, and that Patreon address was what
Go
again?
to makecomicscool.com, and of course follow me on Instagram, Dylan_distraction. And of course, if you go to DylanAndrewsArt.com, that shows all my social media. Just past 3,000 Instagram followers, which I know for some people isn't a big number, but for me, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of people that want to watch me draw silly things. So
it's great, and I think every artist needs to be on Instagram with
That's my favorite one. That's the one I'm on the most posting on. So if you go to DylanAndrewsArt.com, that's a great way to get a free digital comic. If you want to sign up for my email and follow me on all the social medias there, but primarily Instagram is the one I go to. So that would probably be the one you should follow me on. And MakeComicsCool.com, BatlanticStore.com. If you want to just buy stuff for Christmas, I'll try to get it out to you before Christmas, but no promises.
And are you going to do a pre-launch for your Kickstarter? I think they're doing those now, right?
Yeah, that is an option where you can get people to jump in and check it out early. And I'm not sure. The page is all laid out. So that's the thing is with me, the page for the Kickstarter is all ready to go. I've shown it to a few people to get some feedback. The comic book is ready to go. It's just a matter of finding the right time to do that.
The right time to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't right now. I think that I really want to get people to get this the artist edition. So really, right now, that's kind of my focus. But early 2021, I'm thinking Kickstarter, and I'm super psyched to have the Oppressors issue 2. I want to have Cyst issue 2 and Archive Universe, the crossover issue, all in the can, so that once that Kickstarter hits fulfillment, those books can go right out, and there won't be any delay with it. So
yeah, that'd be great. And I'll put links to all your stuff in the description of the video here if anybody wants to follow you.
Yeah,
or join your Patreon, and get some cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm always offering cool stuff. You're gonna get a bunch of cool stuff. That's the thing I think with my Patreons. They're like, "There's a lot of stuff." I'm like, "Hey, whatever. I'm making it. I want to get it to you. So get ready."
Awesome, Johnny. Anything you want to add before we head out?
No, I just wanted to thank you again, Dylan, for coming on the show. I mean, I admire you as a creator. You're a wonderful friend in these creative circles, and I just really hope that everybody takes a moment to stop by your page, check it out, and I'm sure that you have a many new fans that hopefully see this that come from here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me on. I don't do a lot of these just because I always think it's kind of silly for me to talk about myself for this amount of time. But I really appreciate you guys having me. It means a lot to me to be able to find new readers, and I'm always trying to find people that like what I do and want to support it. And it's been a crazy year, and I hope everyone is able to fill their lives with things they love and enjoy. So that's my goal.
And we liked having you on, and we letting people getting to know you a little bit. And I think that that always helps. I think especially when you're selling stuff. And then before we go, I just want to mention, join us next Wednesday, same time. Or actually, no, an hour earlier.
Now,
Next Wednesday at 8 p.m., we're going to have Roy Thomas with us and John Cimino, his manager. So it's going to be crazy next week.
next
And
week,
we're actually going to talk to him about indie stuff and not all his Marvel stuff, which everybody wants to talk about.
That's great. I keep buying, keep buying
Yep.
indie comics, keep supporting indie comics. That it's what I love, and that's what I'm into. And I hope everybody else out there enjoys and appreciates indie comics. And make comics cool for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. And I'm sure we'll talk about some Marvel stuff, but nice. Some DC stuff will slip in. But all right, guys, so we'll wrap this up. I'm going to play our outro, and then we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.